So, what are Iran, the United States, Israel, and the whole Middle East up to again? They're waging war, a war that's been going on for 4 days now, a war between Iran, Israel, and the United States. And Iran is trying to drag the whole Middle East into this war in its own way, even though it says it's only attacking American bases throughout the region and not attacking the states themselves. By the way, that's one of the pillars of how the Americans could meet their downfall, their defeat in this region. And today we're going to talk about this pessimistic scenario for the United States. Today we'll talk about how the war is developing and why the Americans may have taken a step toward their next defeat in the Middle East. Keep watching if you want to know more. Now let's take a look at what's happening. As you can see from the map, there are still bombings taking place in many parts of Iran today. The main focus of the American and Israeli strikes is, of course, on Tehran, but explosions and attacks have been reported all over Iran, whether on ports, bases, industry, or, of course, nuclear facilities. All of this is happening right now. In addition, there have been many strikes on American bases and civilian targets, whether in Qatar, Dubai, or generally in the United Arab Emirates. There was an attack on an oil facility in Saudi Arabia, and of course, there were also attacks on Israel. Hezbollah and Hamas forces became active, launching more rockets at Israel, and the Iron Dome air defense system was active. Besides that, Cyprus was also under threat. Cyprus is our wonderful European territory. That's already our backyard. And for that reason, it's very likely that European fighter jets will get involved as well. The Germans, French, and British are already seriously considering it, and it would at least make sense for us to participate, at least as protectors of the airspace, for example, over Cyprus, and in our own way, help Israel as well. That would be a beautiful gesture of allied support to show that, look, even though we've criticized you, Israel, for the atrocities in the Gaza Strip when it comes to war with Iran, geopolitics, and the protection of Cyprus, we are willing and able to support you in some way. When it comes to serious matters, we're with you, right? So this is something that at the very least can and should be done by Europe, if only for the sake of Cyprus. However, the war is also developing in such a way that Kuwait accidentally got hit by a United States silencer. Qatar reports the destruction of Iranian bombers. Yes, that shows us that there is chaos all over the Middle East right now. Chaos that, by the way, Iran intended, because there are a lot of American planes flying there, Israeli planes. The air defense of all the local countries is active. There are Iranian drones flying, American drones flying, Iranian missiles flying, and it can happen that the air defense panics and starts shooting because maybe the plane doesn't respond, its radar is turned off or something like that. So they start shooting. That can happen. It has happened. There have been 3 shoot-downs. Some people say that it could theoretically be intentional because Iran declared a holy war, and some soldiers in Kuwait might have joined the holy war against the Americans and started shooting at their own allies, who are there to protect them and have a base there. Yes, some people think that. I don't think that. To me, it seems like putting too much weight on Iran's declaration of holy war, and for that reason, I assume it was really more or less an accident. An accident which to me seems a bit illogical because when it comes to any airplanes flying in the air, it's much more likely to be American or Israeli planes. The chance that it could be Iranian planes is minimal. I can't imagine that at this moment any Iranian plane would still be able to fly. There is such air power and so much technology in the air that it's very, very unlikely the outdated Iranian Air Force still has even 1 or maybe 2 combat-ready, flight-capable aircraft. Here's the problem. The problem is that just taking off with those planes would be instant suicide because the F-35s or F-22 Raptors are so superior that it's not even worth fighting them unless you also have at least a 4.5 generation aircraft. And even then, it's pretty much like 20 to 80 odds that they'll just shoot you down. So if you don't have a fifth generation aircraft, it's pretty much suicide to take off and fight against the United States. However, this is what happened, and this is one of the pillars that shows us how America might be heading toward its defeat. Then we have some other news like Iran warning its European allies. Iran is definitely warning those European allies. That's something that could make it unpleasant for us and could maybe force the Americans to make some concessions, because let's take a look at some other important news. Although Pete Hegseth said this is not Iraq, attacks on Iran will not lead to an endless war, said the American Secretary of Defense. This is such an unfortunate statement. Like, overall, the statement is so unfortunate that basically, what did the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of War of the United States actually say? He said, if Iran keeps causing trouble long enough, if the regime digs in, if it hides in the future in bunkers, and if it can drag this out long enough, then we'll just leave. We'll leave. Because we don't want another Iraq, we don't want a ground invasion, we don't want a long war, we don't want a lot of casualties, we can't handle that, we can't manage that, we don't want that, we won't do that. So basically, this is an invitation to Iran, right? There's a way you could save yourselves, there's a way you could win this war, just make it a real pain in the ass. Drag it out, hold on, survive, and we'll get the hell out. Because we're weak, because we don't have the will to fight this war, and because in the end, Congress won't approve it or extend it for us. Also, well, of course, Iran has on its side, besides the weak United States Secretary of Defense and the fact that it's stirring up the Middle East, which over time could start putting pressure on the United States to end the war, because Iran will be telling everyone, look, they're already bombing me, so I'm shooting at the Americans, and if they end the war, I'll stop shooting. I'll stop shooting at the Americans in your countries, at your bases. Put pressure on the Americans to end the war, Iran will say, and will stop shooting at those bases. They'll just stop, like in Dubai. Dubai, for example, will stop having problems with people not coming or leaving. Saudi Arabia will stop having problems with us destroying their oil terminals. Basically, everyone will stop having problems with us shooting at you. You just need to put pressure on the Americans to end the war. This is what Vosserovi can do. Besides that, of course, the Americans themselves can do it too, because surveys show that only 27% of Americans agree with the war or with attacking Iran. 27 at the beginning of their invasion. That means that there were basically the absolute minimum number of people right at the beginning. And war almost never gains popularity as it happens. Unless it brings huge victories and triumphs, but that's exactly what Iran is trying to say and do, to make sure none of it looks like a triumph, and so far they've been quite successful at that. So, of course, they're successful at it for the obvious reason. He's dead, but the Iranian regime is holding on. They immediately appointed a new one, and so on and so forth. So for now, Iran is managing to give the impression that they're holding on and that the Americans are starting to struggle. It's starting to look like, look, maybe it was supposed to be faster, maybe we expected results sooner, but Iran is somehow holding on, right? Even though they've only been resisting for 4 days so far, okay, but it's not going as smoothly as it seems, or as it seemed. So most Americans don't agree with this war, and that's another thing that could make it a pain for the American leadership. So American citizens will put pressure on the American leadership, including Make America Great Again. They'll push the American leadership to end this war. Maybe some Arab states in the Gulf will pressure the Americans to end this war. Of course, there will be voices from Europe calling to end this war if it lasts too long, because why? Well, because here in Europe we're dealing with something. That thing is called the price of oil. And the price of oil is rising, ladies and gentlemen. This is the price of Russian oil. And honestly, the price of Russian oil might interest us more than the price of the oil we buy. Because sure, it's unpleasant. If our gasoline gets more expensive, it will lead to inflation. Here you can see how much the price of oil has increased. It's not just since the beginning of the war itself, when it went from 65 to 76, but even from the start, when the Americans started acting like there might be a war, something might happen, that's when prices started to rise. And basically, we went from $56 per barrel to $76 per barrel in just a month and a half. And it's still rising. So in this regard, this is the annoying thing that can probably trouble most of the world, and of course Europe, and of course America. But on top of all that, this is the annoying thing, the price of Urals oil, Russian oil, which can trouble most of Europe. Because Russia, of course, has been suffering a lot lately. Suffering a lot. It suffered because oil prices were low. They were low. It was at 47, around 55, and the Russian budget is built to withstand it when oil is at $60 per barrel. The moment it's below $60 per barrel, the Russian budget starts bleeding. They begin to go into debt. They can't manage to pay or cover things. That was working. That was working for a long time, and now with the invasion of Iran, it has increased. So that's another point that can put pressure on the United States to either win the war as quickly as possible or just give up on it, because it strengthens the Russians. Of course, it weakens the Chinese who used to get oil from Iran. However, if you strengthen the Russians and weaken the Chinese, you actually increase the bond between the Russians and the Chinese, because the Chinese become much more dependent on Russian oil and can't take as much Iranian oil. So in this respect, it's important. Here, the part that's really, really complicated is that the war has to be won very quickly. And if it isn't won quickly, it actually becomes a lost war. Because here, there's nothing to be achieved that's worth fighting for in the long term, nothing worth dying for in the long term, nothing worth risking the impact of rockets in the Middle East for in the long term, and nothing worth suffering high oil prices for in the long term. There's nothing to achieve here, because the scenarios that appear to us, like the scenario of a civil war, which Trump is calling for when he tells people to go fight against the regime, especially now that he's getting hit by bombers, that's not a very good prospect. Similarly, it's not a very good prospect that the theocratic regime will survive just being loyal to the United States, and it's also not the best prospect that instead of a theocratic regime, there will be a military dictatorship. There are no bright prospects here worth standing up for and holding the flag, saying, yeah, let's go for it, because this is worth it. Because we will suffer from high oil prices, the Middle East will suffer from rocket attacks, and America will suffer because they simply don't want this, and with dead soldiers and everything else that comes with it. In the name of what exactly? In the name of a civil war in Iran? That's not exactly a motivation I'd say is worth fighting for. That's different from Ukraine. In Ukraine, they're fighting for a free democratic state that another country wants to wipe out, and they're fighting there for the security of Europe and for, let's say, the position of the West as such. This is a war where it's worth risking, to some extent, some comfort of living or whatever. But this isn't a war you can politically justify for long. Because sure, for a while people will be excited, right? Look at how the Iranians are celebrating, hooray. But after a week, they'll find out that gas costs 35 crowns and it'll start to piss them off a bit. After a month, they'll see that gas is still expensive, nothing has changed in Iran, and American soldiers are dying, and it'll start to piss them off even more. So, in this regard, Iran has a really, really big chance to win this war by simply holding out long enough until the Western world actually starts to get disgusted, until the Arab world loses patience with the West. Like, what are we even doing here with some Western projection of influence in Iran, right? So that's how it is. This is an incredibly, incredibly stupid conflict, and Iran basically has a bigger and bigger chance to win it with each passing day, because all they have to do is hold out and make it annoying enough for everyone else. And basically, the high oil prices, combined with the fact that American soldiers are dying, combined with the fact that countries in the Middle East are being bombed, combined with the fact that Cyprus is being threatened, that's something that doesn't contribute to the long-term support for the war. Once the enthusiasm fades, we'll be cursing the United States here, and something very bad will happen in the United States. Because, hey, like we said, it's already just 27%. Make America Great Again is divided. Almost all the Democrats are against it, and only half of the Republicans are for it. And that's a very bad sign. He let himself be manipulated by those Jews from Israel into a war that doesn't really have a good solution or a good outcome. And in the end, it almost seems that it will really just be about properly bombing the nuclear program, and any talk of changing the regime isn't on the table, right? So that's it. That's all. Support the content, write your opinion in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Glory to Israel and the United States, of course, but above all, glory to the Persian people who unfortunately are still quite stuck, and I don't see a bright future for them.